So maybe move this a little closer so I can see everybody better. My name is Doron, Doron Kornbluth. Just a few words about me so you know who you're going to be listening to for the next little while. I'm born and raised in Montreal. And when I graduated university, I made Aliyah. As you can tell by the facial hair graying and, barehead, it's been a while. And I've been in Israel for over 30 years. My wife is an American girl. We met there. Kids are born and raised in Israel. I have two that are in the army right now. So if you notice me being a little bit anxious and concerned, that's why. One is in Hebron and waiting to find out if they're going into Gaza. Probably follow the news. Nobody knows what's going to happen right now. The other one is an officer, and he's officially supposed to be an engineering student, an aeronautical engineering student in Technion, but as you can probably guess, the last year and a half he's been in the army much more than in school. So that's my personal story. But I kind of have an interesting list of things that I'm interested in. And I specialized in a few areas, over the years. And what we're going to be discussing tonight is one of them. It's a weird subject. And I always like to start with a story I heard of this older gentleman that calls his wife over and says, "Honey, will you come and sit beside me on the bed?" It's kind of a strange request. So he comes and sits beside him on the bed. And he says, "Honey, do you remember when we were in our 70s and I had my heart attack and you were there with me?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And do you remember when we were in our 50s and I had all the financial problems and you were there with me?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And do you remember in our 30s and we had all that medical scare and everything went wrong?" "Yeah, you were there with me." "Yes, honey, I was." So he leans into her and he says, "Honey, I have something really important to tell you." So a tear rolls down her cheek. She leans into him and he says, "Honey, you're bad luck." Some subjects, it just feels wrong to talk about them. It feels like they're bad luck, they're taboo, looking for trouble. We want to deal with it. We want to know about it. Burial and cremation certainly is on that list. And I'll be honest, I was never much interested in this subject either. A comedian once said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying." Like, we don't want to deal with this stuff, which is why I want to give a big thank you to the Friedman, the Menachem, the Chabad of Santa Cruz for inviting me, for organizing this. Because even if it's not something we like to talk about, some things you have to talk about. It's important to talk about it. To get information, people make their own decisions. And thank you all for coming. I know you all have many options what you can do on a weeknight, so thank you for being here. Not the funnest topic, but I think you'll see together that it's actually kind of interesting and important. So let me start with a little bit of a comforting message. Statistically speaking, again, we've just met. So statistically speaking, numerous people in this room right now have already cremated a relative, have chosen to cremate a relative, have signed their own will, deciding on cremation, are open, there's no guilt coming from here at all. Okay, we're going to share information as adults, share information. Again, I always look at life that, God gave us two eyes looking forward. We don't have an eye looking backwards. Once a year before Yom Kippur, you look back if you did something wrong. But life is about going forward. There's no guilt. We're just sharing whatever. Life is life. Okay, we all make the best decisions we can based on the information we have, and we all try and do our best, and that's fine. But it's always good to have more information and more knowledge, and maybe you'll make a different decision in the future, maybe not. We'll share it together. So that's sort of the introduction. Everybody should relax. We're going to share information. The way that I want to sort of conduct our time together is kind of there's a specific structure I want to use. I'm going to tell you that. First, I want to just understand what's happening today very briefly, what the actual situation is today in the US. Then I want to analyze why people today are choosing cremation. list the reasons and analyze them. We'll see some are stronger than others. Then I want to flip the script, so to speak, and go into why does Judaism and why have Jews, and they're two connected different reasons, why have Jews for 3,000 years so focused on burial? And then we'll get into your comments and questions like that. So that's the structure of what you're going to be hearing and participating in. Intro the situation today, focus on cremation, focus on burial, then we'll get the questions and answers. Okay, so like this. As far as we know, a number of ancient societies, I'm thinking specifically of ancient Egypt and ancient Tibet, but there were others. As far as we know, ancient Tibet, ancient Egypt were very death-focused societies. Now, we don't know for sure. I love archaeology. I'm actually, one of the other hats that I wear is I'm a tour guide. I guide groups around Israel. I take families and groups to Poland. I'm very into old stuff. I love archaeology. But even me, with my love of archaeology, I have to admit, archaeology is not really a hard science. It's a lot of guesswork. What's it based on? It literally is based on like human remains, writings, if you're lucky, material remains found in the dirt. And from what we find, we create a whole picture of what the society was. But let's be honest, how much stuff do we actually find compared to that society? Maybe 1% of what was going on. It's a lot of guesswork. So we don't really know what ancient Egyptian society was like. But from what we do find, from the evidence that we do have, boy, does it seem like they were death focused. They had a book of the dead, right? The tombs, the pharaoh's tombs, were unbelievably intricate. The pyramids were not tombs, by the way. That's I always used to think that they were. They haven't found bodies in the pyramids. We don't think pyramids. It's an argument what they were, but they found so many ancient royal tombs around Egypt and the Middle East in general, and they find foodstuffs. They find boats to take them into the next world, the afterlife. The pharaohs used to kill servants, right? So they would have servants in the afterlife. And it was a very death-focused society. We, in modern America, are quite the opposite, actually. Very little focus on this stuff. I'll even say it's not just even about death. I think it's even about. Well, I'll give you an example. Anybody here remember John Glenn?
Sure.
What was John Glenn famous for? Astronaut, right? He didn't land on the moon, as far as I know. He was one of the first to go to orbit the world, right? Right. And then he became famous again. He became a senator from Ohio, a very respected senator, by the way. He was sort of like an American's American, right? He was a very honorable person, very upright. He's like sort of a role model, for those generations. And then he became possibly even more famous. I don't know. But he had one more big, intersection with fame later in his life. Anybody know what I'm referring to? He went back into space in his 70s. He was the oldest person in space until recently, when William Shatner was escorted by Bezos's thing. But even that, William Shatner and Bezos, they just went up, touched orbit, and came right back. It wasn't the same as the Apollo going around. But anyways, so John Glenn was, when he went back into space as a senior citizen, boy, was it big news. I remember it, actually. And front page, the front cover of Time magazine, newspaper, television, and everybody was incredibly impressed by John Glenn, as I was. By the way, if you think that NASA relaxed the rules so John Glenn can go in space, not at all. Imagine what would have happened to NASA's funding if something had happened to John Glenn in space. Right? He was, I don't know, 70s, whatever, however old he was, he did it. I couldn't have passed NASA's test when I was 18. And this guy did it as a senior citizen. Like, wow, no wonder he was getting such news. So we were all, as we should have been, very impressed by him. On the other hand, I was kind of embarrassed for us. Why? Well, think about it. Why was American society celebrating John Glenn? Not because of his age, his contributions, his wisdom, his experience. It was because he was acting like a young guy. I want to be very clear. I love modernity. Okay, I travel quite a bit. I land in a city. I put my phone into the rental car. I have GPS. I mean, like I love technology. I love the openness of modern. There's a lot of things I love about the modern world. Like I don't want to go back. You think I want to go back to the 1800s in Russia where they were beating up my grandfather? I mean, I don't want to go back there. There's a lot of great things about the modern world. On the other hand, there's also a few things that seem a little bit, we've lost something. This disrespect, and it's not just a lack of respect, it's disrespect for old age, this worship of youth. There's something off. All the more so for people who are sick, God forbid, but who are dying in their final stages, and all the more so for the dead. Just God, like this is not a subject. This is it's almost the opposite of Egypt. It's like a denial, right? Everybody important is young. So, in a different way, by the way, I would even say that surprisingly, that rabbis don't get nervous. Okay, trust me. In our own way, even Judaism doesn't really want us to focus so much on death in the afterlife. Just think about it. When a Jew has a drink, what do we say? L'chaim, to life. Judaism is very life focused. Of course, we believe, and there's rules about what you do and the traditions, but it's a very minor subject, really. It's actually quite fascinating. Like we don't really focus on it too much. Our job to bring a little more spirituality into our own lives, to help build the Jewish community, to help improve the world, to make this world a little more open for God's presence. I mean, we focus on life. And death is like, okay, yeah, we'll worry about it when it happens. It's never really been a big issue for us in daily life, you know. And to be honest, I don't think that really was a problem or really mattered through much of history. Because at least on our subject for tonight, there wasn't much to decide or to think about. For 3,000 years, it was well known that Jews buried the dead. I was never interested in this subject. My sort of niche, I've been a Jewish educator for quite a while, and for many years I've been traveling around like I'm sort of doing here, but it wasn't on this subject. Giving workshops, seminars. I do a lot for parents and grandparents. I wrote a book called Raising Kids to Love Being Jewish, and I speak to parents and grandparents about how to keep Jewishness in your family. I do a lot for teens and for college students who might be Jewish. There's a lot of relationships. It was always very positive. And then about 12, 13 years ago, I was on a speaking tour in Florida. I remember when it happened. And all my talk, I wasn't into the subject. I didn't have an expertise in the subject at the time. And I was speaking to parents, and I opened up a Jewish newspaper in Florida, and there's an ad from a Jewish funeral home offering Jewish cremations. Big ad, and I was surprised. I'm a traditional Jewish boy from Montreal. Montreal is it's changing now, but it's a beautiful community, beautiful city. Growing up, it was like a very traditional Jewish community. It was later immigration, a lot of Holocaust survivors. Like it was just there were certain people were more observant, people less observant, people different. Everybody had their own thing, but everybody kind of lived in the same neighborhoods. And there were certain basics that like everybody did. Just an example. Growing up, I never met a Jew that wasn't in shul on Yom Kippur. It was just an automatic. No matter how religious you were, how religious you weren't, what you did, nobody asked the question of how if you were fasting, the whole fast. I'm not asking, but everybody, the shuls were packed on Yom. Everybody showed up on Yom. It's just a given. Jews go to shul on Yom Kippur. There was also a given that Jews don't pay retail. Given, we know it, right? And there was a given that Jews don't cremate. This is one generation after the Holocaust. We all knew Holocaust survivors, and it was just not a Jew. I never heard of a cremation growing up. So, it didn't really matter to be so educated on the subject. So when I opened up this newspaper in Florida 12 years ago, I was in shock. And I started to look into it. And I spent 3 years researching the subject, very much in depth. That resulted in the book that you saw on the entrance. And since then, I've been speaking about the subject, and that's because things have changed. Why I focus on this is because things have changed radically. Just to give you a number, right? In 2017, 8 years ago, America, I'm not talking about Jews, I'm talking about all of America. The United States has about 340 million people. The death rate in a Western country is just under 1%. COVID was a little bit higher, unfortunately. So with 340 million people, you have roughly 3 million deaths a year in the US. Thank God there's more births and immigration, so I think the population is healthy and strong. But that's how many deaths there are. Expect more or less, right? And in 2017, when you look at those 3 million, the majority went from being a majority burial in 2016 to a majority cremation in 2017. As of now, 2025, the estimate is that 55 to 57% of the American dead are being cremated. No doubt it will quickly get to 60% if it's not. This is a huge change in America. When I was a little kid, it was under 10%. Cremation rates were under 10%. 50 years ago, 2 generations, it was under 10%. So the American number has gone from less than 10% to almost 60% in my lifetime, right? For Jews, it has also changed dramatically. We don't have an exact figure for how many of the Jewish American dead are being cremated. Nobody knows for sure. But I will tell you what the estimates are, and I'll tell you how I know them. When I got into the subject, I became quite close to a rabbi in New York, Rabbi Elchanan Zone. You might know him. He's the rabbi's rabbi on these issues. He's sort of the, people call him 24/6, I guess would be the way to say it, on on anything a burial. And I did my first Tahara, like preparation of the body with him, and he led me to all the research. And so he told me that at the time that he did a study. Again, this is over 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago. He did a study, an informal study, not a scientific, an informal study of Jewish funeral homes in the New York area. And at the time, it turned out that 25% of the requests were for cremation. Now, I don't know if you noticed those sort of adjectives. That was in New York, the most culturally Jewish part of the country, just simply because of the overwhelming presence of so many Jews in close quarters that automatically leads to more community involvement, more Jewish camps, more Jewish practices. Everything just builds on each other, right? The more you're together, it just does that, right? So that was over 15 years ago. And that was people who chose a Jewish funeral home. People who are affiliated enough with the Jewish community who are almost automatically more likely to do more traditional things, right? When you extrapolate out to 15 or almost 20 years later, to other parts of the country where there's less Jewish people involved in education, everything, and to people who are not necessarily choosing a Jewish funeral home, there is no doubt today the most conservative minimal number that is given is that 1/3 of the Jewish dead are now being cremated. Personally, can't imagine it. I simply can't imagine it's less than 40% because everywhere I go, including yesterday in the Bay Area, Jewish funeral home tell me that they are dealing with 25% requests, right? And that is only the people who go to a Jewish funeral home. Huge number. I mean, if you count how many people are dying, far majority are not even in a Jewish funeral home, right? So there's no doubt that it's 40% in my mind. Let's just think about that for a second. In one generation, in one lifetime, in my lifetime, in 50 years, it's gone from, for Jews, it was under 2%. When I was born, it's under 2%. Now it's 40. Mirroring the Western world. It's happened everywhere, right? Tacitus, Roman historian, when he was describing the Jews to his compatriots, in only a couple paragraphs, right? He said the Jews bury rather than burn the dead. It was one of the defining characteristics that stuck out, right? Cremation is not a new thing. In ancient Greek, Roman societies, most of the world, cremation was the norm in most of human history. Right? We stood out because we didn't cremate, that we buried. Until recently, things have changed dramatically for the Western world in general, for the US, and for us. So now, with that intro, I want to ask you, let's forget about Jews for a minute. Forget about this beautiful Chabad house. And just talk about America. Right? The millions of Americans who are making this decision. More and more, the majority today are choosing cremation. So we don't have a lot of time, it's a big crowd. So let's just in one word, tell me, why are people today, of all types and backgrounds, why are people today choosing cremation? What is the reason? What's the motivation? Number one, cost. Good. What else?
Ashes spread over the ocean or something like that.
You can just do anything you want with the ashes.
Yes.
Good. What else?
It's easy.
Easy. Very good.
They're not, they don't live near where their family is, so they're just somewhere else, so they're by themselves.
Mobility issues.
Yeah.
Right, correct. Right. In the old country, they used to have a family plot.
Right.
Exactly. Well said. Yes.
Environmental issue.
Environmental issues. Can you specify?
Not enough space.
Land, burning out of land. Very good. Anybody else? You've hit, I'm very impressed. You've hit all the main ones, I think. Anybody else?
Keeping them close by. Like,
Very good. Like taking it with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, taking the memory with you. Very
The
good.
expense.
It costs. Very
Some
good.
people even make diamonds out of there.
You can send the remains into space. You can put them in a coral reef. You can do, whatever floats your boat. There's a million options there. Exactly. Right. Okay. So what I want to do now, and usually it takes longer to get to that list. I'm very impressed. Thank you. What I want to do now is analyze the reasons you just gave of why Americans of all types are choosing cremation more and more today than when we were kids or a generation or two ago. I think we're going to see together that some of those reasons are kind of weak. Some of those reasons are actually false. There's one reason in particular that, and I'm very straight, I'm very honest, there's one reason that where cremation actually does have a legitimate advantage. And then we're going to analyze these, we'll go together, see how you feel, those are my conclusions, and then we're going to flip to the burial side, okay? So let's start with what you said, environmental reasons. The phrase that cremation societies like to use, and as a simple pet peeve, I resent the fact they call themselves cremation societies. It implies that they're nonprofits. It is a very for-profit industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that runs most of them in the country. But that's my pet peeve. Thank you for letting me vent. The phrase they use is land is for the living. Meaning, it's a very moral, strong argument, seemingly, right? We have a limited amount of land. The population keeps going up and up and up. And we are running out of land. So why waste it on dead bodies that don't need it? Leave it for the birds and the trees and the forests and the parks. And it's a very powerful argument morally because, what's the Jewish priority? L'chaim, life, right? So literally, like, wouldn't you prioritize life over death? So I did the math. I'm not the first person to do the math. My book came out in 2014, I believe. I've been speaking about this subject ever since. I would say about a quarter of my talks when I speak for college students and teens, it's very different. But for communities like this, about a quarter of my talks are on the subject. So I've spoke thousands and thousands of people over the years, and my book's been out. I've never been called out once on the following. I'm not going to bore you with statistics tonight. But I'll give you one and two. I'm going to share with you now one statistic, inarguable to my mind, because it's not even my stat. It's just, get this. If every American who died, about 3 million a year, were to be buried, and I'm not speaking to every American, I'm speaking to the Jewish community, less than 2% of the population. But let's even multiply who I'm speaking to by 50, okay? And say if every American who died were to be buried, get this, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of the US landmass. That's how much land we have in this country. 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's landmass. And you and I both know few, if any, cemeteries would last those 10,000 years anyways. Meaning, theoretically, if you had to make a choice between land is for the living and land is for the dead, I get the question. But you don't have to make that choice. There is no need to make that choice. True, you want to be buried in, downtown San Francisco or in Manhattan or on the, I don't know which direction we're going, or on the boardwalk of Santa Cruz that I went to today to see, kind of neat. Like, you have a problem, there's not a lot of land. But how often do you go to a cemetery anyway? I like cemeteries, actually. Don't worry, I don't go every day, I'm not a weirdo. but there's no obligation to visit a cemetery. There's a strong tradition before Yom Kippur, before Rosh Hashanah, even that's not a strict obligation. If you connect to it, great, if not, but I mean, within 1 hour of every metropolitan area, there is plenty of land. And I'm not talking about the protected redwood forests that are so beautiful. There's a, just if you doubt me, next time you're in an airplane, look down. It's an empty country. I landed this past Friday. I was speaking in Florida for about 12 days. And then on Friday, I flew from Fort Lauderdale, great flight, 7:30 a.m. to land here. Yeah, I landed in LA at 10:30 a.m. And I was there for Shabbat. I was speaking to students at USC. I drove up on Sunday. You're in an empty state. I know it doesn't feel that way on the coast. I get it. California is empty. The whole country is empty. By the way, this is true in North America. This is true in South America. This is true in Europe. It's true in Africa. It's true in Asia. It's true in Australia. There's only 2 places that actually isn't true. That's Hong Kong and Singapore, and there are solutions there if you want them. Environmental groups don't even talk about the amount of land. It's not a real issue. There's plenty of land. How about you go once a year? Father's Day, Mother's Day, yard site. Like, I mean, the drive an hour, there's plenty of land. Burial uses a remarkably small amount of land. We use far more land every year building new Walmarts. So yes, 99% of land is for the living, 99.9% of land is for the living, 99.999% of land is for the living. There's no problem. The more serious environmental concern is not the amount of land. Environmental groups don't even talk about it. It's what goes into the land. And that's a serious one. This was an early environmental critique of American burial, started in the 1950s, believe it or not. And there's a few things that are pointed out. 2 main ones, really. Number 1, metal caskets. Boy, is that an environmental disaster. If you know about it, it should keep you up. I mean, it's horrible. We're talking hundreds of thousands of these caskets. You have to make them, you have to forge the metal, the big jump. You're putting them into the ground. They're rusting for 1,000 years. The environmental disaster, unbelievable that we allow it. Unbelievable. Right? Second environmental critique of American burial, embalming. Forgive me, I'm going to try not to be too gross. There's a couple things tonight that we just have to share the reality. If you're not aware, embalming means removing the liquid, basically the blood, from the body. It's replaced with preservatives. To this day, 2025, by far the #1 choice is formaldehyde. Okay, gallons, 8 to 10 in many cases, are put into the body. Obviously, the body still decomposes. It's still going to go into the ground and the groundwater. Environmental disaster. By the way, it is only the U.S. In the whole world, only the U.S. has such high embalming rates. Dates back to the Civil War. Tens of thousands of Union soldiers were dying in the South. Took 2 weeks for the trains to get them back. The parents wanted to see the bodies, Christian viewing, all that kind of thing. So they started embalming en masse. Before that, it was very small, then it became the norm. Embalming is a legitimate disaster environmentally. These 2 things are inarguably horrible for the environment. No wonder that environmentalists don't like American burials. Does anybody notice anything about these 2 elements that they have in common? Embalming and metal caskets?
And to solve.
What? Right, that's the problem. But what do they have in common?
They don't have that traditional Jewish burial.
Excellent. They're not Jewish. We don't allow either, actually. Jewishly, you're supposed to have a simple wood coffin, biodegradable. By the way, where I live in Israel, they don't even use coffins. I mean, they have, each cemetery has like 2 or 3 there. They carry the body in a coffin to the grave, and then they remove it. First time you see it, it's strange. And the body is put into the ground in burial shrouds, tachrikim we say, or in a talit, right? And actually reuse the coffins, right? In most places, coffins are standard, and simple wood, biodegradable, not an issue. Embalming is against Jewish law, considered a desecration of the body. If you want to know why, just go on YouTube and watch one. You'll understand in 30 seconds why we don't know that. Environmental groups are not in favor of cremation. It is simply not true. The cremation industry is in favor of cremation. Environmental groups are in favor of what's called green burial. The main character traits of green burial, there are 3 main character traits. Number 1, no metal caskets. Number 2, embalming. Number 3 is how you design the cemeteries. And by the way, it's getting much, much better in terms of the design of all cemeteries being planned now. It's all going in the direction of Jewish and even some non-Jewish, right? Jewish burials have always been a model of environmentalism. Environmentalists don't like cremation. Cremation uses a tremendous amount of fossil fuels. Just think about it. We've all gone to great expense. We're getting off of our fossil fuel cars, getting hybrids, getting e-vehicles, and suddenly you have the electricity to burn a body. By the way, when I started this research, right after that incident in Florida with the newspaper article, I remember thinking, yeah, cremation is, it's like a microwave oven. Right? You put it in, it takes 5 minutes. If you're a thin person, it's 90 minutes to 2 hours. For the majority of Americans like me that are a little bit overweight, okay, it can be easily 3 hours. If you fall into the obese category, a quarter of Americans, it's 4 hours. It's a tremendous amount of electricity. Furthermore, crematoriums release toxins into the air. Many municipalities have rules of that you can't have a crematorium beside a school. Ask yourself why. A local story actually from COVID. In the first few months of COVID, there was an article in Los Angeles Times announcing that the City Council of Los Angeles had temporarily relaxed the air pollution rules on crematorium in LA County. Because there are rules on crematorium how many cremations they can do per day, so as it doesn't negatively affect the air pollution too much. But because, unfortunately, there were so many people dying and so many bodies that had to be cremated, the LA City Council allowed them to do more cremations temporarily. There's a lot of toxins released in the air. The worst one, by the way, if you're like my age or older, if you have a filling, you might have mercury in your teeth. They don't do that anymore for kids, right? But in our generation, they most certainly did. Horrible for the environment. So again, environmentalists are not in favor of cremation. They're in favor of green burial, avoid the problems of cremation, and Jewish burials are a model. Okay. Next, a few people mentioned different versions of the mobility issue. You said it right. It's a problem with burial and it's an advantage of cremation. So let's look at it like that. I was just in Florida. Florida happens to have relatively high cremation rates. There's a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is there's a lot of retirees in Florida. So just think about it. Where am I going to have my grave? Here in Florida? I mean, I'm in a seniors community. How long are these people going to be around themselves? And are they going to visit my grave? They're not going to visit my grave. I'm going to be buried back in New York, having lived there for 30 years. I'm going to be buried out west where the kids are. Like, what are you talking about? Like, who knows how long they're going to be there? I've never lived there, right? And let's face it. My kids aren't that traditional, so I don't even know if they'll visit a grave anyway. So the logic goes that no one's going to visit my grave. So if no one's going to visit it, why bother having one? It sounds pretty reasonable, right? So I want to test your knowledge. Raise your hand if you've been to Israel. Amazing. I'm so glad to see it. If you haven't, still time to go. I'm not sure if you should wait till after the war or go now and give us strength during the war, but at some point. So most of you have been there, which is great. True or false? The #1 most visited tourist site in Israel, the #1 visited site is the grave of Moses. True or false?
False.
That's false, right? How do you know? There's 3 ways you should know that statement is false.
We don't know where he was.
Not in Israel. What else?
We don't know where his grave.
We don't know where it is. Good. And you've never heard of anybody visiting it, so you would have by now, right? Okay. So the main reason is at the end of the Bible, the end of the Torah, it says very clearly that Moses, never makes it into the land of Israel. The whole story hits the rock. He's speaking to the rock with all different commentators what it means, but he never entered the land of Israel. He's buried in what is now the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan on the east bank of the Jordan River. And the verse makes it very clear, we don't even know where he is. his place was hidden. Why? Tradition explains that he was such a great prophet that it could have become a site of idol worship. So God hid the place of his burial. So now ask yourself the following question. Has anyone ever, Moses died about 3,000 years ago, has anyone ever knowingly visited his grave? No.
No, the answer is no.
So when you realize that, it changes the whole perspective on graves. We modern people, understandably, we connect two ideas: having a grave, visiting a grave. Why do you have a grave? So people can visit a grave. And if nobody's going to visit the grave, there's no point having a grave. Logical connection. We'll get the questions and comments after, okay? But the Moses example makes it very clear that these two concepts have nothing to do with each other. Archaeologically, we know for sure 3,000 years ago, there was plenty of cremation and many other. The Tibetans put the body on a tower, let the vultures eat it. There were plenty of methods of disposal of the dead, with cremation being the most obvious. And yet God did not choose cremation, even though no one would ever knowingly visit his grave. Because whether or not a grave is visited, it has nothing to do with having a grave. It's a whole different, it's like when I realized this, it was like, wow, I always assumed that was the reason. That's nothing to do with the reason. It's irrelevant. By the way, I am always surprised at how many times you have a cousin, you have a grandkid, you have somebody gets into Jewish genealogy and they start looking up graves, they become a little more traditional, they start visiting graves. You never know when that grave is going to be visited. But even if not, it has nothing to do with whether or not to have one. And then you get to the idea, which is very common. I hear about it a lot, we read about it a lot, of people taking the urn, the cremains, as they call them, cremated remains, the urn, the ashes with you. Listen, from a human point of view, my father passed away during COVID, not from COVID, but during COVID. I'm there, I get it. I just have a couple of questions to ask. We're going to have to make your own decisions in life, right? But for 3,000 years, Jews, many people, we have found ways to remain connected to our loved ones that died. Last 100 years, photos, before that, mementos, pieces of writing, memories. I fully understand the desire to have something from your beloved. Why does it have to be cremated remains? Just a question for you to think about. For most of human history, people didn't do that. Right? If anything, they were probably more connected to the memories of the past than we are. Secondly, I'm going to take a little bit of I'll take an extreme example. So Judy is the daughter, and she was closest to the parents, so she gets the urns. Right? So Judy has 2 urns. But then she gets on in years, she wants to downsize, right? So passes the urns on to the next generation. Next generation is how many? 4. Next generation, 8. Next generation, 16. It's a bit of a joke, but that's my point. That our homes, our lives, are not really meant for the long-term care of cremated remains. At some point, sooner or later, and from what I hear from a lot of people, usually it's sooner, we get rid of the remains. Every funeral home that I know of, and I'm this week I've talked with people from 2 and 1 last week. You can Google this. Every funeral home that I know of has a problem of unclaimed cremated remains. They don't want to pay for whatever, but nobody who you say, "Oh, I'll take part with me." It's just something to think about. You draw your own conclusions. It's not so simple. Mobility issues. Okay. You didn't mention one reason that people say that they choose cremation. They're uncomfortable with burial. Don't want to be eaten by the worms. Kind of gross. I think it is kind of gross, actually, burial. I remember high school labs. Decomposition is not pretty. Okay, I'm not claiming it's pretty. I just want to compare and say cremation ain't pretty either. Forgive me. During that roughly 3 to 4 hour process, whatever, let's say it's 3-hour process. I'm sorry to say this, but the body is not calm and spiritual. The muscles are contracting and expanding. The brain is sizzling. It is a loud, smelly, awful, violent process. It's disgusting. Now, burial is also disgusting. I'm just pointing out that like some people say that that burial is old fashioned. Cremation is new, stylish, right? So listen, you got to do what you got to do and make your own choices. I respect everybody. I just have an idea just to think about it, and maybe in a little different way, and maybe that'll help you think things through for yourself or share this to others. I'm not wearing a tie. I hope that's okay, but I'm a pretty informal guy. I went to a high school where you had to wear a jacket and tie every day, and since then I was traumatized and like I just can't. The only time I wear a tie really is Friday night. You know, Shabbat dinner, going to shul. That's what I wear. And my kids hate my ties. There's always something wrong with my ties. I don't even know what it is right now. Either they're too wide, or they're too thin, or they're too thin, or they're too wide. And they're always telling me to get rid of my ties. And I absolutely refuse. I know I wear what they want me to wear just because it's not worth the fight, but like I refuse to throw out my ties. Why? Because you and I both know that in 2 years or 3 years, max 5, but usually not that long, the thin ties are in, the wide ties are out, then it flips. These are really good silk ties. I'm not throwing them out. Right? Styles come and styles go, and fads come and fads go. And listen, in terms of what you're planning for dinner and the decor for a wedding you're making, I get it, right? In terms of like disposal of the dead, like is that you really gonna be like? So my point is, when you look at easier, right? It really does seem easier to do cremation. It's a 1-800 call in some cases, right? And there's a fascinating man in Michigan. His name is Thomas Lynch, poet undertaker. Undertaker runs a funeral home and a prize-winning poet. And so he wrote a lot on the subject. When I was educating myself, I used a lot of his sources. And he said the following. He said, you know, people don't want to be a burden to their kids. And he said, but like, isn't that the ultimate, like, the role of a child? Like, to take care of their parents in their final, like, is it really that much of a burden? Like, are we really so afraid of a little bit, like, so, to be honest, like, if you plan early, it is not particularly hard to do a funeral. Again, if you don't plan anything and you leave it till the end and it's grief and people arguing about money, I get it, like 1-800, you know? But like, we're not talking about, oh, it's years and years of work and what's a few hours? I think it's so like the easier, maybe it is a little easier to do cremation, but really, I mean, like, you know, like we're not talking major difficulties over here. So when you go through the reasons that people today are choosing cremation, which we just did, you make your own decisions, your own judgments, but it seems to me that within the 15-20 minutes, we realize that like these reasons are a lot weaker than they seem. Some of them are just not true. The environmental reason is not true. Mobility issue is not true. Some of them are, yeah, maybe a little bit, but except one. There is one reason for cremation. There is one aspect of cremation that is an undeniable advantage. And I'm being very honest. We have to address it. Cost. What you said, I think, originally. Typical cremation in the US today ends up start to finish, everything, roughly $3,000. You can definitely go that low, right? You can definitely go that low.
Retail.
Okay, there you go. It can go, we're talking a few $1,000s is more than for rent. Again, you can do a really expensive cremation, full funerals with everything. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars on cremation, right? And you can also do a funeral that is very cheap. I shared with you some of, you know, just to share with you some of my trauma. When my father passed away 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, during COVID, I'm from Canada, right? So I flew back, you know, I was with him, you know, his last days. But I mean, Canada was nuts on COVID. I'm not getting into what you think of the rules. I'm just talking about Canada, and I'm a Canadian. Canada was nuts. I became anti-Canadian during that time. Why? I sat Shiva alone in an Airbnb. My brother sat Shiva alone in a different Airbnb. And my poor mother sat Shiva alone as a widow because no one was allowed to be together. Nuts. Absolutely nuts. The funeral service, through an amazing amount of effort and rules and this and letters, and it was unbelievable what we had to do. We were allowed 10 people outside, right, graveside, within, I think it was a minimum of 2 meters away from each other, right, to say Kaddish, right? So it was it was horrible and traumatic, and whatever. It also was a lot cheaper than a normal funeral. It was, okay. So you can have cases where cremations are really expensive and funerals, if you want to make a funeral cheaper, you can. I'm going to give you some ideas later. But the norm of what we're used to within our realm of normal, cremations are $2, $3 or less $1,000. The number I hear generally is 2 to 3, right? And funerals, start to finish, burial, 8 to 10 minimum. Rarely will you get less than 8. By the way, there are ways if people don't have money. I'll tell you later. We can talk about it. But typical thing is 8 to 10. I've heard of people even 15. By the way, if it's adding up to you to be more than that, give me like you're in the wrong funeral home, the wrong cemetery. It's highway robbery. There's no reason on planet Earth for it to be more than $12,000 or $15,000. It should not. And I already think that's too high. Okay, I know somebody. I just met them 2 days ago in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. I don't even know where I was exactly. But the number they were getting, start to finish, was over 20. Okay, and they did what I applauded them in public. And they did what I think is a brilliant move. They buried their mother and father in the Sacramento area. Cost them less than half. Jewish funeral, Jewish burial, Jewish cemetery, normal cost. But at the end of the day, there's no doubt burial is more expensive than cremation. Usually we're talking at least a $6,000 or $7,000 difference. So now I want to literally and figuratively flip things. Why is it worth the extra money? Because all the other reasons are really, they just don't add up, to be honest. They don't. What? Well, let me try, and we're gonna get there. You're much too deep for me because it takes me a while to get there. You already got there. Okay, step by step. Yeah. So I want to now give you a number of reasons why Jews throughout history, right, the Jewish people and Judaism, two separate but connected things, why we as Jews and why Judaism so insists on burial, even to the point that it's worth the extra $6,000 or $7,000. Gentlemen, when you proposed to your beloved and you handed her a ring, I'm almost sure you did not get that ring from the bottom of a Cracker Jack box, right? You bought a proper ring. There are some things that are worth the extra money. I am now going to try and share why I think our tradition and our people has said this is worth the extra money. Reason number one. In World War II, in the Lodz ghetto, there was a rabbi. His name was Rabbi Ephraim Oshri, in English, Oshri. He actually survived the war, miraculously, made it to New York, told the following story. One day in the ghetto, a Nazi officer barges in, blonde hair, blue eyes, full uniform. Rabbi Oshri thinks he's about to be killed. Nazi slams the door, closed behind him, and starts speaking with the rabbi in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. I look the part. I got a uniform. I'm moving around every day to a different place. This is how I'm surviving. But I have a question, a very important question for you. I'm a very sick man. The doctors say I have a few weeks to live. And I know what they're going to do to my body when I die. They're going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body, surrounded by Nazis forever. I've done this for a few months to survive, but I can't bear the thought of being in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body, surrounded by Nazis forever. Can I be cremated to avoid that fate? And Rabbi Oshri took his hand warmly and said, my dear, dear child, no, you can't. In normal times, a Jewish person should do whatever they can to give themselves and others in the Jewish community a proper Jewish burial. That means a Jewish cemetery, that means the Hebra Kadisha. It's called the Hebra Kadisha, and it's a burial society, right? But it doesn't, Hebra Kadisha actually means the Holy Society. I'm credible with that. That's what they're called. To treat the body respectfully, they wash it, they wrap it, they prepare it for burial. The community lowers the body into the ground. The prayers are said, the Kaddish is said, the dirt is put on top, a little bit of dirt from the land of Israel traditionally is put in. In normal times, Rabbi Oshri explains, we must do whatever we can for ourselves and other Jews to get a proper Jewish burial. But even in these times that we are living in hell, the Jew must do whatever they can for themselves and for others to at least be buried. So even if you're going to be in a Christian and Nazi cemetery, it's better than cremation. You must do it. You must allow yourself to be buried. Amazing. Rabbi Oshri also brought all the sources, it's verses in the Torah. It's amazing, actually, that in the Torah, in the Bible, in the Torah scroll, there's so little space, so little ink is devoted to like major parts of Judaism. The rules of Shabbat, pretty fundamental, so little space about them, right? Yom Kippur, so little space, and yet so succinct. The Torah is so succinct in some areas, and yet it goes to length. Abraham is buried, and Sarah is buried, and Jacob's buried, and Rachel is buried. Like, if I was creating a religion, I don't think I'd really care about what happens to a dead body. Our religion clearly does. Towards the end, in Deuteronomy, it even gives the mitzvah. It's a commandment. It's an obligation to bury the dead. It says that if a person is an evil person is put to death, and in Judaism, the death penalty was basically a deterrent measure. Morris says once in 70 years it's too much, right? But even in the rare, strange case that somebody's actually put to death, Morris says like bring them down at night and bury them. All the more so a normal person for 99.999% of people. It's a huge part of our religion, surprisingly big parts. Classic, but this is not just bagels and lox. I happen to love bagels and lox, no offense. But if you brought bagels and lox back 800 years to Maimonides, famous medieval scholar, he wouldn't know what the bagels and lox were, right? It's really a cultural thing. It's a nice cultural thing. It's a cultural thing. But burial, that's the number one reason. First reason we're going to talk about in terms of why Jews and Jews. It's core to our religion. Surprisingly important. Number two, it's not just Judaism. If you were to make two maps of planet Earth, map number one would be a map of monotheism, where people believed in one God, versus, I guess, like would be one God versus a many gods, polytheism, and no gods, atheism, right? So you need a map of monotheism, and then you need another map of burial, right? Versus cremation and many other methods, right? So you have a burial map and you have a monotheism map. And you put them together very, very close. They're not exact the same, but boy, is there a major overlap. They're almost the same. Just think about it, okay? India, polytheistic country, 97% cremation rates. Japan, same thing. Historically, I'll give you an example. Europe was very Christian until World War II. Burial was the norm. Now it's post-Christian Europe. Churches are empty. It's considered the most secular continent on the planet, actually. Europe is considered, right? Cremation is the norm by far. The Middle East, right? Islamic countries, right? Islam is a very monotheistic religion. I mean, we're like 100%, right? There's not one crematorium in an Islamic country. I mean, zero. They don't allow them. Completely against Islam, nothing. In Israel, monotheistic country, right? 10 million people. One oven, one crematorium, mostly servicing non-Jews. Monotheism and burial. Even here in the States, by the way, you notice this correlation. Quote unquote secular coasts, much higher cremation rates than the Bible. Fascinating. By the way, why this connection exists? Why do monotheists generally, there's exceptions to every rule, but why do generally monotheists choose burial at much higher rates? A lot of literature, a lot of theories. I'll just share with you mine. Right? The proof text of monotheism, the Torah, the Bible, says very clearly at the beginning that every human being is created in the image of God. Now, we're physical beings. God, therefore, is not physical, but there's some kind of spirituality, uniqueness that, and you don't mess with the image of God. You lay it gently down to sleep. That's two reasons so far why it's worth the extra money. Core part of our religion, surprisingly important. monotheists worldwide historically choose burial. Number 3. Well, I'll ask you a question. Raise your hand if you have ever visited a Jewish monastery or a Jewish convent. Anyone? I know nobody would raise their hands. Why? Because it's a trick question. Because there aren't any.
There's one next to the tomb of Moses.
There you go. Exactly right. Well said. I'm going to use that. I love it. So there aren't any. Why? Why not? What, you think Catholics are stupid? They're not stupid. There's like a billion of them. Plus smart people. Or Buddhists, right? They have monasteries and convents as well, right? You think they're not stupid. It's a different philosophy. It's a philosophy that I disagree with, but we have to understand and respect and understand what it is. Right? Philosophy is very, again, Catholicism and Buddhism are very different. But on this point, they're actually the same. On this one point, the philosophy is like this. Their philosophy. If you want to be spiritual, if you want to rise up and get close to God, you must deny the physical. This means asceticism, sleeping on hard floors. This means celibacy. This is why the Pope doesn't get married, the priests and the nuns. Far East, Dalai Lama, celibate. Why? It's a philosophy, right? It's a philosophy that if you truly want to be spiritual, you have to get away from the physical. They're enemies, physical and spiritual enemies. It's one or the other, zero-sum game. I have a Catholic friend who told me that in his community growing up, the best and brightest intellectually and the most interested spiritually would be sent to the priesthood. That was just like the height. If you're really spiritual, go, like, you have to avoid women. So that's their philosophy. I understand it. It's not the Jewish view. The Jewish view is quite the opposite. We believe that God, obviously, God is a good God, and he created a good world. Physicality is good. It is not bad. It is not the enemy. Of course, the rider has to be on the horse, meaning that we have to use our minds and our hearts to direct our physicality so we don't just get hedonistic and go nuts, right? The mind has to be in charge. But I could not give charity without my hands. I couldn't give somebody a hug without my arms. I can have children without my body. Physicality is good. No wonder that we take physicality seriously. The body is good. I'll give you an example. Imagine, God forbid, a woman loses her partner, loses her husband. They've been married for 40 years. She's wearing the black dress. She goes to the funeral. That night, comes back home from the cemetery, takes off her black dress, puts on a red party dress, fixes her makeup, and goes out to the bars cruising for a new guy that night. Sound normal to you? Of course not, right? When you have a partner for decades, and you don't just move on immediately. The soul and the body are partners. And our tradition says, it's amazing insights, amazing teachings, that when the body dies, the soul doesn't just leave. This is its partner. The soul couldn't accomplish anything in this world without its body. So the soul, during the 7 days of mourning of Shiva, the soul goes back and forth between the grave and the Shiva house, hearing what's being said about it, during the 30 days during the first year, and the soul always remains connected to that place. Because that physical place there's something there that remains of the energy of that person. Where they're buried. And I'll even explain it on a purely physical level. Again, this is a spiritual idea, which is what you were talking about before. But I'm saying the physical level. So far, and we are approaching. We talked about the situation today, and we analyzed the reasons for cremation. And now we're analyzing why is it worth the extra $6,000, $7,000, right? Core part of our religion. monotheists, we're now discussing that the body is important. We regard it with very high regard. So far, the rabbis in the back are waiting patiently and are wondering, I brought this guy from Israel to talk about burial and cremation, and he's been here for what, 35 minutes, 40, I don't know how long I've been here. And he has yet to mention the number one reason that the Talmud gives for burial. You know, and they're thinking in their minds, like, he's not going to mention the number one reason. So I didn't until now on purpose, and I'll tell you why. Because the number one reason the Talmud gives for burial, to our modern ears, including myself, at first sounds weird. The resurrection of the dead coming back to life. If you haven't looked into it, let's all be honest, sounds nuts. You know what I think of intuitively? I'm not proud of this, but we're friends now and we'll share this, okay? I'm born in the 60s, I'm a child of the 70s, the 80s. I remember when MTV became huge. And I remember the first major video on MTV. Anybody know what I'm talking about? What?
Video star. I killed the video star.
No, that was much later. Thriller. Michael Jackson's Thriller. 7-minute video. Remember the video? Walking through the cemetery. The dead comes back to life. Zombie movies, right? So when a modern person, every time I fly on a plane, I'm walking up, there's so many zombie movies on all the screens. I mean, they're still making zombie movies. You tell it. So when you hear the phrase dead coming back to life, if you're a modern person, be honest, sounds nuts. You believe in this stuff? So I want to share with you a really important principle. There are many, there are core, beautiful, true, incredibly wise Jewish ideas that because we first came in contact with them via Hollywood or via Christianity, they just seem like, what? That's Jewish? Like, we're supposed to be smart people. We believe this stuff? To give a parallel, many Jews think that like belief in the Messiah is a Christian idea. And it's a Christian idea that they're uncomfortable with. Son of God, like what? I've even met a lot of Christians who are actually uncomfortable with the idea of the way that it's presented. So, okay, Christianity is pretty new, okay? Different religion, put it to the side. They stole the idea from us. When you get back to the core idea, it is a beautiful, true idea. And thank God Chabad has brought it back into Jewish consciousness. There was many Jews didn't even know we believed in it, right? Same thing with dead coming back to life. Sounds nuts if you think about it via Hollywood. French philosopher Voltaire once said, "It is no more of a miracle to be born twice than born once." Changes your whole perspective when you think about it. I'll even give you a physical way of understanding it. Anybody here seen a Jurassic Park movie? Yeah. Okay, there've been like 8 of them or something. I don't know, they keep every time I come back to the States, I see a new one, whatever. So for those who haven't had the experience, Jurassic Park is a Hollywood series. The concept is like this, that millions of years ago, a mosquito stings, bites a dinosaur. A little bit of the dinosaur's blood, including DNA, goes into the mosquito. The mosquito is then caught in some amber, fossilized. Millions of years later, we are able to extract the DNA, recreate the dinosaurs, and you can go to a park like Disney World and run around dinosaurs at Jurassic Park. Okay. So it sounds like, and it's presented as crazy science fiction. The only thing is, it is much more science than fiction. I'm not saying they can do dinosaurs tomorrow in a park, but they are much closer than you think. Anybody remember Dolly? Sure. Who was Dolly? First sheep to be cloned, first animal to be cloned. Okay, a successful cloning actually. It survived like a number of months. So it wasn't just like a here and done. That was 40 years ago. Today, there are Hollywood celebrities, numerous, you can Google it, that clone their own animals so they don't have to take them with them when they're traveling, and they can have them in their different homes around the world.
Really?
Yeah. You can clone your pets if you want. They're now planning a park. I heard about this, that it's supposedly going to be in like Eastern Russia. They're planning a park where you can actually see woolly mammoths brought back to life, because they have found numerous woolly mammoths frozen in the ice. DNA is there. No problem. It is much more science than fiction. Even in Israel, you probably even saw an example. You might have on Masada. If you went to Israel, you probably went to Masada, the desert fortress where we fought the Romans 1950 years ago, right? The final stand, right? So on the top of Masada, they found date pits, 2,000-year-old date pits. Removed the DNA, and up the road at the Engedi Botanical Gardens, there's a huge palm tree. By the way, it's a one generational, like it's like a mule, like they haven't figured out how to get it technically to give fruit to be, oh, they're on the way, right? The idea, we're not here talking about cloning. Cloning, it's an ethical problem and a legal problem to allow how to do it. The science is there, right? So, like this. Talmud says that there is a bone in the human body. It's called the luz bone. L-U-Z is how you write it in English. Some believe it's over here. It connects from the spine to the brainstem. Some believe it's down here. Others have a different group called the luz bone. And the Talmud says that the luz bone never disintegrates. And from the luz bone, the dead will be brought back to life. The body will come back.
The Atlas.
What?
It's the Atlas.
There's a wide disagreement amongst what it says. All the Talmud says is luz. There's about 4 different opinions. Yours is the most common, but there's a lot. So I want to explain this physically, what I think it means, and then even more importantly, I want to share what I think the idea means. So physically, I did a lot of research. I talked to a lot of forensics experts. If you go and exhume a grave from a couple hundred years ago, you will not find any evidence of a luz bone. Science today doesn't say that there's a bone that so seemingly, what the Talmud said, what does that mean? Right? I want to explain to you what I think it means. The Talmud didn't know about DNA. DNA is physical. I just want to emphasize that. When they're extracting something and checking DNA, it's physical. I mean, that's what they're doing, right? I think all the Talmud meant was there's a small, little thing from which the person's blueprint, energy, physicality, from any DNA, you can recreate a whole human being, everything. DNA from your foot, and they rebuild your whole brain. It's unbelievable what's in there. Hard for us to even imagine it, right? So the Talmud is teaching us there's a little part of our physical being that never disappears. And from that, we can come back. Now, why we're going to come back? Listen, I don't fully understand it. Some say we're going to come back temporarily, but I will tell you the idea of it. It fits so beautifully with what we said before. The physical is important. That's why there's no Jewish monasteries. That's why there's no Jewish convents. That's why on Shabbat you have great food. That's why every Jewish event you have food. Physicality is good, and it even has a role in the future. So, like this. Take a seed, put it in the ground. What happens? Sprouts, grows. Take a seed and burn it and put it into the ground. What happens?
Nothing.
Nothing. It is dead. There's a soccer pitch in Scotland that has big signs stopping people from dumping cremated remains on the grass. All the fans want it to be, ashes spread in their favorite football club, right? Except it ruins the grass. It's physically and symbolically death. It hurts other life. Furthermore, there's no DNA left. When you burn a body, 1,000 degrees, it destroys it. You cannot tell the difference between one human being and another human being once they are cremated. The DNA is gone. The person's blueprint, their originality, uniqueness is gone, which is exactly what the Torah is teaching us. Don't do that. You're unique. You're special. Your physical life is important. Simple example. It's all similar, but a simple example. God forbid, rabbis, hypothetical situation, God forbid, educational purposes only. You're driving up on 17th Street. What was it? What was it on? 17th. That was good. Okay. So you're driving up, and God forbid you see a fire. So what do you do? Remember there was the Hurricane Katrina when in 2005, 2006, whenever it was, and in Louisiana, and the shuls were all flooded. and the Torah scrolls were destroyed beyond repair. Yet if a Torah scroll is hurt, it is damaged, you repair it, take it to a scribe. But if it's damaged beyond repair, you bury it. They had a big ceremony, it's on the news, right? Bury the Torah scrolls. So God forbid you're driving by and you see a fire. Do you try and save the Torah scrolls in the Holy Ark? It's the holiest object we have, a Torah scroll. It's also the most expensive, be $100,000 to write. It takes them a year. It's a big deal, right? So, would you try and save the Torah scroll?
Not,
Keep going.
not if you were risking your life.
If a fireman is there telling you, don't go, then I'll share with you a little known Jewish law. You're not allowed to risk your life for a Torah scroll. Think about this for a second. It's the holiest object we have. We unbelievable holiness in it. And we buried it when it's damaged. And yet you are not allowed to risk yourself for a Torah scroll. I want to emphasize, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter if you're old or you're young, doesn't matter if you're healthy or you're sick, doesn't matter if you're more religious or less religious, doesn't matter. Because as holy as a Torah scroll is, you are holier. Your soul and even your body. Someone once said, we get right? Yeah. We burn the garbage, we bury treasure. Unbelievable. So we're almost done, and I'm going to get through your questions and comments. We did an intro, understanding what's been happening today. We then went through the reasons for cremation. Most are weak, some are just not true. There's one that really stands out as it's an advantage. It's $6,007 cheaper. Why is it worth the extra money? I'm trying to understand why Jews have focused on this for 3,000 years. Number one, core part of our religion, surprisingly important. Number two, the monotheist connection is unbelievable. Where people believe one God, they choose burial generally. Number three, and this has been a much longer one, but it's the concept that our bodies are important. They're holy, thank you. We treat them with respect. What we do in this world is important. How we treat our bodies, it's a partner for 50 years. You don't just move on. Final idea. I don't know where I got this from. I have this in my mind. It's like this older Jewish guy gathers together his kids and say, kids, I want to tell you something. And I just want you to listen to me just for a few minutes. Because I may not have been the best Jew on planet Earth. To be honest, I didn't have a strong Jewish education, didn't really do much Jewishly. Looking back, maybe I'd do things differently if I knew more, I don't know. But there's one thing I do know. I'm proud to have been born a Jew. I'm proud to be a Jew. And when I die, I want to be buried as Jews have been buried for 3,000 years. I want the rabbi to say the prayers. I want the Chevra Kadisha, the Holy Burial Society, to prepare my body. I want my Jewish name mentioned. I want the Kaddish said, because I want my final statement, my final declaration on the planet to be, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but I'm a proud Jew. I don't know about you, but I'm very touched by that. Ladies and gents, it's not an easy topic. Someone once said, there are worse things than death. Have you ever spent an evening with an insurance salesman? So there are worse things, but it's not an easy one. So I want to thank you, Rabbis Chabad of Santa Cruz, for bringing me here. I want to thank you for coming. It's an important topic. And what I would encourage you, we're going to have questions and comments, and what I encourage you to do is to use my being here as sort of an excuse just to raise it with other people. So I travel around giving these seminars and workshops, right? I respect whatever people do. Almost every case that I come to where people are choosing cremation, it is based on misinformation, lack of education. They leave it till the end and the kids are fighting about it. Just a personal, I have no interest, I have no commission, just a personal piece of advice. Like, don't leave this till the end. There are certain moments of life that can and should be, of the life cycle, I guess, can and should be when like families can come together and have a beautiful moment together. So make your decision, make it very clear when the time comes, phone the Chabad rabbi at this number. Hope it's okay that I given you. They'll make all the decisions in terms of what to do. You already pay for the plot, get it all done, so the kids aren't fighting about their inheritance. You've given them enough money. You know how much it costs to raise a kid?
Yeah.
Okay, too much, right? This is you. Right? Get it all, and that way, your wishes are clear, they're in writing, the rabbi's involved. And when the time comes, it shouldn't come for a long time, we say Ad May Vestrim until 120, right? But when time comes, it can be a beautiful moment of family coming together where they don't have to argue and fight and decide. It's all done, you took care of it. You're doing them a kindness by taking care of it. And you're declaring to the world, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but I'm a proud one. I think it's an incredibly strong statement. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I want to hear your questions and comments. Thank you. Yes.
I had a question on you're saying like you brought up like Moshe Rabbeinu's grave and all that. I think if people knew where it was, they would go visit it, and like Kfar Tzaddik, and people go to the grave sites of holy people all the time and pray. There's a whole thing that goes on with that, and then also the when you bury somebody, I guess like 30 days later, you're supposed to say Kaddish and go see the grave and everything. So how does that fit into kind of your thesis of being buried some place where there's space where nobody will ever go? Like how do those two mesh?
So the question is, I made a point that having a grave and visiting a grave are two separate things. For those who have to go, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you. Just to plug this going, I wrote a book on the subject. Okay, it's a paperback for $15, made it very cheap, as you can probably guess from the printing and the shipping costs. There's no money being made. It's important to have the information, share it with others. So please take a copy, have it on your coffee table, pass it around. Like it's just getting the word out. It'll have all the information for you and the research and everything there. Just wanted to get that plugged in. Let me just answer this and then we'll go. So I think what you're saying is entirely valid. And for people who do want to connect to graves and who do feel the importance, that is definitely a part of Judaism. But it is not an obligation. And it is one school of Judaism that focuses very much on that, a more Hasidic approach. The more rationalist approach was never into visiting graves. I'll give you two very simple examples of that.
What about all the Machpelah and all that? All the people lit fish and all that.
I'll try and answer. I'll give you two classic examples. Again, I'm not against visiting graves. I love visiting graves. I do. Just pointing out that Maimonides' grave in Tiberias, the famous irony is that Maimonides clearly was not into visiting graves. People visit his grave. Kind of interesting. My personal teacher, his name is Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky. He's one of the grandchildren of a name that many of you probably have not heard, but his grandfather was quite famous in Orthodox circles. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, one of the leading rabbis of the 1970s, 80s. And I remember it's really struck me. It's like I went to New York about 30 years ago, whatever, and I'm from Montreal. I wasn't in New York that often, and I went to visit my teacher's grandfather's grave. And I came back and I told my teacher that I felt connected with my whole sort of tradition was through him and my learning. I felt sort of and I went and I told my teacher that I had just visited his grandfather's grave, and straight rationalist Lithuanian style Marxism. And he looked at me like this and he was like, "Thank you, that's so nice of you to go." He said, "I haven't even been there in 10 years. It's not so absolutely it's a beautiful thing, but it has nothing to do with whether or not you have a grave. Zero. Nothing, doesn't pertain to our subject at all. If you want to visit, great. You connect to it, great. If not, not. Yes.
Could a non-Jew choose to be married in a Jewish way with all the
To
tradition?
be buried or
To be buried, to
So
like prepare.
it's fast. I once looked into this very deeply, and it's a fascinating reality that, and I wouldn't have I wouldn't have thought this would be important personally until I got into it. It turns out that almost every religion on planet Earth, there's exceptions, but almost every religion, certainly the major religions, has a strong insistence on being buried amongst your own religion mates. What's the word? Co-religionists.
Or all
Fascinating.
mixed marriages.
It's huge problem in all cases. Just think about it, right? There are Catholic cemeteries, there are Protestant cemeteries, there are Muslim cemeteries, there are Hindu cemeteries, there are, well, Hindu, not so many, because they cremate, and there are Jewish cemeteries, right? So Greek Orthodox, that's separate from Catholic, it's fascinating, right? And so the explanation I once heard, and to be honest, I'm not sure if this is even a Jewish explanation, because it's not really a Jewish question, but and the question is like, why is, the idea is that if you are a believer in community, it's not anti somebody else. It's that community is important. And I want to signal that. So I want to be around community. I want to signal to the future, that community is important. And it doesn't just disappear. So when you have mixed marriages in all of these cases, it gets very difficult, very complicated. You've got to talk to the rabbis. It's not simple. It's not simple. There's many people who deal with this. Okay? I will say, again, I'm not figure out however, it's a common, it's half the marriages, it's very common today. So I will say that it sounds strange. The importance of being buried beside your spouse is extremely overrated. I don't mean not to do it. It's important to do it. I'm just saying it's a rarity in history to be buried beside the spouse. It's actually not that common as you go around. Like,
Families usually stay together.
so family plots are a beautiful thing. I have one in my family. Okay, rarity in history. It's interesting. I'm just pointing, if you can do it, great. I'm just pointing out, I know plenty in my family, I know plenty of people where for various reasons, they were married different times, they didn't buy, they moved around, like, it's not an absolute, oh, I have to be. If you can arrange it, great. If not, it doesn't have to be. You're together in spirit and in heaven, awesome. Any other questions, comments? Anybody? Yes.
So I remember learning about a like burial pod that
Yeah.
ran into like a tree.
Okay, so,
I'm
okay.
curious about the.
Okay, there are
There
so many options today. Okay, you have aquamation. Aquamation is acidic alkaline water decomposition. It's not the pod you're talking about, but it is a pod. The body is put in there. Instead of taking roughly a year, how body normally decomposes, that's the cottage plant corresponds to the decomposition of the flesh normally, roughly. So it'll happen in a few months. Aquamation is it's a little better in terms of than cremation. You use a little less electricity in cremation. You have compost, and this is not your question, but it's all parallels. You have composting, right? Just like to compare, but like you compost the body, right? That people do it. There's your version, which is
mycelium.
what?
Mycelium.
Mycelium.
Mushrooms.
Mushrooms, exactly right. Yes, that's one of the newest ones. It's not legal yet, by the way. They're still those testing it. And then yours is also a different version of where they're basically putting the body in a pot, putting it in a tree, and it's going to grow, right? So I have a technical and a philosophical comment on your specific question and the other ones that I mentioned. Okay, technically, these are all new fads. Nobody knows anything about the long-term effects. Okay, an example. Okay, aquamation, which is the water thing. Okay, that only became legal anywhere in the States in 2011. No research, no studies, no long-term anything. Human composting, that they call it. Okay, 2019 was the first one in the States. The tree one is a prototype. I don't think it's legal anywhere, as far as I know. Maybe I'm missing something last year or two, but to be honest, since the war started in Israel, I haven't been on top of the latest thing. My point is that that this is all new fads. Nobody knows anything about the environmental impact, about the psychological. We don't know anything. So it's like the tide question that I mentioned before. I'm nervous about. That's a technical thing. It's like nobody can say anything. Somebody told me recently they were looking into aquamation, and I've researched it. I know a little bit about it. It was like, there's no environmental group, and they think it's better for the environment. There's no environmental group, no neutral environmental group ever has talked about this yet. It's too new. Nobody's done any research. The aquamation company claims it's better. which may be right, may be wrong. We don't know. Like all the, there's a, that famous like I forget, it's not Murphy's law, one of these rules like law of unintended consequences. Like they think something is better and it turns out. So I'm always technically of like wait, you gotta wait 20 years for any of this stuff. Okay. More fundamentally, here's my philosophical answer to that and to parallel ideas. I find, and this is just me speaking, right now, but I find that and this is probably a good end to our time. I'm still here if you want to ask questions or comments, but just one final concept. I find that many people, understandably, including me, we're very uncomfortable with death. And we don't like it, obvious reasons. So I find there's two responses to death that people have. And at first they sound very different, even opposite. And I'll describe them in a second. But when you get to the core of them, like, wow, there's something really connected, okay? Some people are very opposed to death, don't accept death, and fight that they don't like death, it's unfair. So what do? I'm gonna slow this thing down as much as I can. That's metal caskets, that's embalming, that's mausoleums, that's extra concrete liners.
Vacuum.
Yes, vacuum, good point. All of the, again, they're all different, but all of these methods, the commonality is, I am not just letting this happen. I am going to fight this as much as I can. We all know the body is still going to decompose, but it'll take 5 years instead of 1 year. It'll take 10 years. Like, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to slow it down. Right? Some people have the exact opposite reaction. I hate this death thing. There's no way I'm dealing with this. I'm going to get this over with as quick as possible. 7 days of Shiva become 3 days of Shiva. Then you sit for 1 day. Now they're doing that at funeral home the same day, right? Instead of a long, St. Kaddish for a year, right? We'll do a cremation, get it over with 1-800. I want to get this thing done, right? Same thing with the composting, the acclimation. What you're saying, it's a quick, just get it done. Put in chemicals, compost. Like again, these sound very different. Some people, I'm going to speed the whole process up. I'm going to slow the whole process down. But they're the same thing at the core. I think what Judaism is teaching us is, 6 days of the week, we work, we invest, we improve the world, we try and change the world, make it a little better for other people, make it a little better of a welcoming place for God. We're active. Seventh day, we sit back. Shabbat. Shabbat means stop. That's what it actually means. Even in modern Hebrew, when they have a strike, it's called a shvita, stoppage. Right? You just stop, you accept. Our whole lives, we are building, we are controlling, we are active. And at the time of death, our tradition says, now is not the time to exert control. We find this fad and do it this way and this way. I'm going to speed it up, I'm going to slow it down. Lay it gently down to sleep. An animal is born, it runs around the forest, it lays down and decomposes. A plant grows, it reaches its peak, it decomposes, goes back to the ground. Burial is the natural way of every living thing. It is the natural way of every living thing. And it means I am accepting the finality of life. I am not in control. There is divine destiny, there is guidance, there's God, but it's not me controlling things. So that's the philosophical challenge, I think, to all of these options, even if they were technically, better in some way, which until now is not at all proven, probably the opposite. You follow?
Can you plant a tree for flowers on or around the grave?
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
You can.
Yes.
'Cause that's the part that was like appealing to me about,
Yeah.
growing something.
There are a number of Jewish cemeteries that are officially open and working with green burial. To be honest, the typical Jewish cemetery is the most ideal green burial compared to anything in the world, But if you really want to, if that's important, yes, there are. There's actually one in the Bay Area that I was told.
Mill Valley area.
Yeah, that does green burials, and it's not either or. Have the Chaver Kadisha, have everything done right? I'll just let me end you with one quick idea, and then and I'm glad to meet and talk after, but we'll do it privately. When a baby is born, they wash the baby, they wrap the baby, bring it to its next stage of life, so to speak. God forbid when a person dies, the Chevra Kadisha Burial Society, they wash the body, they wrap the body. It's a different stage of life. And what our tradition is teaching us is just try and make that transition a little bit easier, a little more spiritual. It gives us directions. And it's a beautiful, wise direction. Ladies and gents, thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm glad to share this on this. If you have questions, comments, if you want resources, the book is available. You can find me online. Thank you.